2015, Kaziranga, Assam. We, family of 442, went on a 2-week trip across Assam from Kolkata. It's my parents, grandmother, paternal aunt and her husband and their 2 kids along with the travel agent, family friend and his wife. We booked our cars and reached the bungalow in Kaziranga at around 8 p.m. in the night. I vividly remember the night because it was the first time I had seen a moon that bright red. It was Purnima and the surroundings were lit with this light golden light from the moon. It was breathtaking. Our bungalow was located near the edge of the national park. It was a 1-storied house, which had its own lawn in the front. There were only 5 rooms along with a big restaurant and a large sitting room. Right in front of the bungalow, there was an unfinished house, 2 of whose rooms were left bare with 2 walls still undone. Right next to it, there was a big coconut tree, in whose shade we would sit in the front lawn. Before I start retelling the incident, I need you all to know that my uncle claims to see the supernatural. We have grown up hearing this, listening to him recall his experiences in various situations in the most dark, empty of places. None of our trips as a family were complete without us kids cornering him and making him tell us a ghost story that he swears came from experience. But we also believed that he made most of those up, as it seemed quite difficult for us to believe that he has actually experienced all of those situations. Coming back to the incident, it seemed that everything was normal when we reached the bungalow that night. The cook, the manager and his wife welcomed us, and after a brief rest, we had a light dinner as we were planning to wake up early the next day for our elephant safari. Next morning, when we met at the car, I was still drowsy. When I was sitting in the car, I saw something in white stand behind the car next to the edge of the property staring at us. Thinking it was probably the cook's wife, I gave it no thought. On way to the park, my uncle was asking my aunt in hushed whispers if everything was all right with her. It was on our way back from the safari that my uncle confessed that he couldn't sleep last night because he heard sniffling sounds all throughout the night. Obviously, it wasn't my aunt. That, and coupled with the fact that he saw a silhouette in white run past the lawn back and forth, there were sheer curtains drawn. It was a very spooky situation. After having our breakfast, it was the travel agent's wife who asked the cook if the other lady manager's wife stays in the bungalow at night. He replied in the negative, saying she goes back to their house, which is next door, to take care of the kids. All of us recounted the creepy incidences that happened, and I kid you not, the man ran inside and came out the manager. Their first response was to convince us not to leave. They kept saying that the area of the bungalow is protected. There was nothing in here that could harm us. We forced them to tell us everything after threatening them that we would leave if he doesn't. Basically, the story goes like this. This lady killed herself in the small, under-constructed building right next to the bungalow a couple decades back. Since then, that building is haunted and the lady is seen often by tourists and villagers crying and screaming. Several months back, some tourists had a terrible time when they saw the lady inside the bungalow. She had climbed up on the coconut tree, and according to the driver of that tourist family, he could see her swing the tree back and forth. After that incident, the manager had done a bit puja in the property and even tried to reconstruct that building next door, but after the construction workers fell sick, they stopped the project and let it be that way. We finished our evening car safari and hightailed our ass out of that hotel that night. I've been wanting to tell this story for a while now, but I wasn't sure where to put it. I guess I'm breaking a rule to say this, but I hesitated at submitting it where it would be surrounded by other stories that I do not believe to be true. Anyhow, another story that was posted here long ago brought me out of my mental safe space and made me remember the woods. I really try not to do such a thing, and having been born with the willpower of an ox, I am normally successful. I spend most of my days engulfed in enough work for 3 people, and I goof off on Reddit in between. This keeps my mind occupied during the day, and by the time I'm ready to sleep I am so exhausted that I'm out in seconds. Please know, this is not an attempt to build an audience to promote a book, nor is it an exercise in creative writing. I own a business, have zero interest in riding past getting my point across or relaying a story to those around the world who might be interested. For some reason, it is important for me that you understand that. Prior to this event, me and the woods had no issues. Nothing could scare me. I could sleep anywhere, and I had no problem being in the wilderness alone, even after dark. So, several years ago, a friend invited me to go camping in Kizichi National Forest with a promise that he'd take care of everything. I was burned out from work and agreed. Said goodbye to my wife and kids and was on the road the same day. We planned to camp out Friday night and possibly Saturday, depending on how we were feeling. The minor details are wholly unimportant, but we put the tent up, had a few drinks, and went to sleep the first night after dining on hot dogs and potato chips. Saturday morning, we decided to go exploring. We hit a public trail and were just enjoying nature for a bit, walking and talking and mostly enjoying the time away from our usual responsibilities. There were other people here. Not a lot, but we spent most of our hike behind a group of 3 and past a couple of families and hikers that were walking slower or had stopped to enjoy nature at some point. My point is that this was not some isolated trail 30 miles in the woods. Signs of civilization were all around us. About an hour into our hike, we decided to head off trail and check out the woods. Maybe we'd stumble across some snakes or other wildlife, or thus find a cool spot to hang out and eat our lunch. So, we took a hard right and headed into the woods. There was not much underbrush in the area, so walking was easy. We were still talking about our lives, but now, instead of following a trail, we were stopping to roll logs or kick around a pile of leaves looking for signs of life. Sometimes you'll find mice in such places or some interesting-looking bugs. I've even found salamander eggs that were near hatching before. Pretty neat stuff. While we are doing this, we are venturing deeper and deeper into the woods, in a straight line. No, we did not get lost. That is not where this is going. I assure you that when the time came, we made it back to the trail without any physical issues, hung a left and carried our asses back to the campground to retrieve the truck and get the hell out of there. We didn't even pack up his tent or any of our belongings when we left. What we saw that day has caused me to avoid the woods no matter what. I don't even like driving down wooded streets these days, and I hesitate to visit friends that have more than a few trees in their yards. I know it's irrational, but it helps to keep me in a good place mentally, so fuck it. But to get back to the story, because we had no mission or plan past enjoying nature, we were walking very slowly and not at all at many points. I tell you this so you know that we were ridiculously close to the trail, to other people going about their lives, to a sense of normalcy. A mere 45 minutes later, we stop at a nice and quiet spot to eat a few snacks. My friend, Cody is his name by the way, sat down on fallen tree to dig around in his pack. While he was doing this, I walked a few dozen yards to take a piss when I get a really odd feeling that I can only describe as dread. I'm sure all of you have experienced it in some form, but it tends to happen to me in the woods, although not as extreme, fairly often. The goosebumps, the feeling that something is off but you can't really put your finger on it, etc. It usually makes my bowels clench and makes me feel like I need to talk a shit. I never really wondered if I was unique in this feeling, just assumed that it happened to everyone. Not being a believer in the supernatural or anything of the sort, I always chalked it up to my instincts or subconscious warning me of danger. Maybe my eyes passed a venomous snake, but I didn't notice it because I was lost in thought, or maybe there were sounds of an animal wandering around that I didn't pay any attention to that my subconscious process and wanted to notify me of. Hell, maybe it was something as simple as a hole in the ground that I might trip in. Whatever the cause, I always thought this feeling was pretty damn cool. So I finished pissing, and I'm thus turning around to head back towards Cody when my mind screams at me, "Listen, you fucking idiot. Don't you hear that?" And I did. I had heard it for a good minute or so now, but it was such a normal sound that I didn't process that there might be anything wrong with it. It was not the sound of bugs or birds or anything else you'd expect in the woods, For some reason, it was especially quiet on that front. It was the sound of young children giggling and talking and making other noises that children make. When I strained to listen more closely, I also noticed a very faint buzzing noise. Fucking weird. I am walking back towards Cody at this point, and for the first time since I was a small child, I got the feeling that something was behind me and that I should move faster. I didn't run. Much too much pride for that, but damn it if I didn't pick up the pace so much so that by the time I reached my friend, I was stumbling like a drunk from trying to move my legs faster than they'd normally go for such a chore. Do you fucking hear that? I laughed my ass off, partly at myself for getting spooked, partly at the incredulous tone in Cody's voice when he asked the question, partly from relief that I wasn't going crazy and partly from nervous energy. Cody had his head tilted in that listening pose, with one eye closed as if to damper input to his other senses to improve his hearing. It sounds like kids are playing 200 foot into the woods, but why in the hell would they be out there? I suggested there might be a campsite a little further in, but Cody informed me that it was all woods, at least for several miles. This made us question each other and ourselves on whether we had gotten turned around and were hearing kids on the trail. Nope. We both agreed that there was no damn way. My subconscious already knew that though. I always take mental pictures when in the woods, and I was 100% positive that the trail was in a straight line in the opposite direction of the sounds. I didn't mention the buzzing. I didn't want him to think I was freaked out or something. I started walking towards the sounds. Cody followed. We didn't have to discuss it. We heard noises and wanted to know what they were from, but 300 feet in, I wasn't so sure anymore. For starters, the ground turned soggy and was getting soggier the further we went. Second, the sounds seemed to now be coming from all around us somehow. They were still faint like voices in the distance, but they were somehow close, almost like we were listening to a recording on very low volume. Third, I fucking tripped and nearly fell. And the thing that tripped me, the seat of a goddamn seesaw. It was sticking out of the muck as if a pile of mud was dumped on it and the other end was under there somewhere in the down position. I didn't really recognize it as a seesaw at the time, but it was. The handlebars were barely visible as if they were resting on top of the mud, and a little further down, the part one tripped on, was a seat on a fucking stick. Seeing it instantly increased my dread tenfold, and while I didn't know why at the time, it was because it looked brand new. The paint was solid. There was a padded seat. It looked like it was plucked out of a catalog and jammed into a swamp immediately. Fourth, what in the hell is that fucking buzzing? Now it sounds like thousands of pissed off wasps are buzzing just over our heads. Fifth, why am I walking in a damn swamp now? It's hot as hell. Hasn't rained in ages, and the ground was solid 300 feet back, but my shoes are now covered in this gray goop. For some godforsaken reason, we kept walking. To the right, about 20 yards away in a low spot, the yellow head of a plastic horse was staring at me. It was one of those spring toys you see at playgrounds, mud up to the seat. Cody pointed out that to the left of us in the distance was the top to feet of a swing set. The chains of all three were at 45-degree angles, two one direction and one the other, almost as if they were in use when a dump truck of mud materialized around them. Directly in front of us, and where Cody was headed, were stairs. As we approached, I recognized that this mud is up to my ankles now. It's the top 5 steps of a slide. Cody was about 15 feet in front of me. I wasn't really interested in the slide or the woods anymore. I saw him reach out to grab the handrail and heard something I will never forget. A young voice called out in front of us, behind us, all around us, and in my bones, "Hey mister, what are you doing up here?" Fuck Cody. I did a 180 and ran. When I reached the trail and dared to glance behind me, I saw that Cody had decided that running was a grand fucking idea, as he was right on my heels. You know the rest of the story. Most of it anyhow. Hang a left, get in the truck, carry our asses home. The only other thing of interest I can add is the answer Cody gave to my question of "Did you see it?" Yep. Fucking seesaw was up on the other end, and the chains to the swings were in completely different locations than when we first saw them. These days, I try not to think about the woods. The knocking started about a week ago. I had fallen asleep on the couch again, and it was so loud that I yelped as I jolted awake. I was disoriented, of course, caught off guard by both the rude awakening and the awkward position in which I had passed out. I started to stumble to the front door, both eyes still half closed, when the unusual R registered to me. Who the hell would be at my door at this hour? I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and made my way to the vestibule. The small panes of frosted glass framing the front door let me know what to expect in terms of visitors, but I couldn't make anything out through the darkness. Whoever was there hadn't set off the motion sensor light, nor had they knocked again. I was only a moment away from dismissing it as a fabrication of my dreaming mind when the knocking came again. It was loud and insistent, but it wasn't coming from the front door. The sound echoed through the house from the rear, the back door. That was even weirder. I couldn't tell if they'd started at the front and moved around the house or if I'd been too surprised to note the direction of the sound when I awoke. Either way, it had definitely freaked me out. I was glad I had had the foresight to draw the sitting room's blinds before I fell asleep. I didn't like the idea that whoever was knocking might have been able to spy me sleeping through the window. I made my way as silently as I could down the hall and into the kitchen, where I paused for a moment. The back door, which opened into my small backyard, was in the adjacent laundry room. My heart raced slightly and my breaths were just a touch quicker than was comfortable. I couldn't deny that I was spooked. I tried to rationalize why someone might be knocking at my back door so late at night. I lived alone and didn't have family in town. None of my friends tended toward mischievousness, or I might have suspected a prank. I didn't know my neighbors. In my wildest anxieties, I could picture the cops showing up at my door to arrest me for some infraction I hadn't realized I'd committed. But surely they would come to the front door like any other polite visitor. All I could think was that it was some trick, a scam, a way to get me to open the door so it could be held at knife point and robbed. I crept towards the back door, trying to get as good a view as possible without exposing myself to the large window that made up most of the door's upper third. It was no use. Whoever was there, I couldn't see them. Just like in the front, the motion sensor lights hadn't activated. I took another heartbeat or two to muster my courage and then stepped right up to back door. I could see, my eyes having adjusted by now to the darkness, that no one was there. The window revealed only the small disheveled yard. Though it was in need of some minor groundskeeping, it harbored no uninvited guests. The knocks that came then made me jump nearly out of my skin. I barely avoided pissing myself. They hadn't come from the back door or the front. I could tell now, from where I was standing, that they came from the basement door. It was set into the wall on the far side of the kitchen, just a short distance away from where I stood. Someone was in my basement, knocking on the door. That door doesn't lock, and there was no other way into the basement. Whoever was down there was already in my house. They must have broken in earlier and then waited. It felt like some kind of sick game. My blood froze. All I could hear was the echo of the knocks, reverberating through my skull. I silently thanked God that I had fallen asleep on the couch, still fully clothed, with my phone in my pocket. I wasted no time calling the police. The dispatcher had me make my way back to the front and outside, so I could meet the police as they arrived. The entire time I was on the line, only a handful of minutes, I was terrified that some axe-wielding maniac was going to come bursting through the door and disembowel me. What actually happened was almost worse. The cops found nothing. No signs of forced entry. Nobody in the basement. No indication that what I had experienced had happened at all, other than my obvious cowering. The cops were sympathetic, if a little frustrated. They suggested that I had had a bad dream. If it happened again, they said, more condescendingly than I appreciated, I was welcome to call again. It did happen again, the following night. It had been a long day at work and I was tired. My boss had been sympathetic, at least, but it was obvious I was preoccupied and unfocused. She sent me home early that day. I crawled into bed only after I had checked all the locks, all the possible points of egress into my home, and then checked again to make sure they were secure. I even forced myself to head down into the basement, just to prove to myself that no one was hiding down there. The basement is small, one room, and mostly a featureless one at that. No windows. Just a couple of shelves and a half a dozen or so boxes that I still hadn't gotten around to unpacking. I even opened up the boxes, just to make sure the only things inside them were knickknacks and assorted junk. When I was satisfied with my search, I breathed a small sigh of relief. Not a psycho killer to be found. Despite that, I was uneasy still. There wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a sense that I wasn't welcome. I suppose it's not uncommon to be afraid of basements, but I hadn't ever felt like this before. I used to think it was juvenile. As I said, the knocking returned that night. I woke up much more composed than I had the night before. My phone and a mid-sized knife I had brought up from the kitchen lay in easy reach. Again, I called the police, and again they found nothing. I was left with the distinct impression that they would not welcome a third call. The knocking returned the following night, and the night after. I didn't call the police, and I didn't get out of bed. I just laid there and listened to it, timed the knocks. The earliest it started was 1:23 a.m., and the latest it ended was for 11 a.m. Each set of knocks came sporadically, sometimes only 2 minutes between knocks, and sometimes as long as half an hour. If there was any kind of pattern to it, it eluded me. I changed tactics the following night. I needed to know that I wasn't imaging things. I asked a drinking buddy of mine, Connor, if he wouldn't mind staying over at my place just for the one night. I told him what had been happening. I think he thought I was being silly, but he agreed. I had tried to communicate its importance without sounding desperate, or like I was losing my mind, but I doubt I succeeded. He showed up at my place just after sundown. I supplied pizza and beer, my part of the deal in disrupting his schedule. "So, what exactly am I here for, man?" he asked as we ate. "You think there's someone hiding in your basement?" I let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know. I keep hearing someone knock and it's freaking me out. Honestly, I just hope it happens again while you're here so I can prove to myself that I'm not completely insane." He laughed at that. "I think you're past the point of insanity, bud." I smiled, but I was nervous that nothing would happen, that him being there would prove nothing. He slept on the couch that night, at my request. It was closer to the basement door, and I wanted to make sure he could hear the knocks. When they resounded through my home that night, as aggressive and insistent as ever, I leapt from my bed and rushed downstairs, nearly tripping over myself in the process. I was stunned to find Connor sleeping peacefully on couch, blissfully unaware. "Wake up," I was nearly shouting as I shook his shoulders. His eyes snapped open and his face twisted with shock. "What? Jesus Christ. Man, you scared me." He sat up and shook his head a little, evidently trying to recover from the heart attack I'd almost given him. "Did you hear it?" I could tell from the look on his face that he hadn't. I felt wild, coursing with adrenaline. "It's fine. It always happens more than once." Connor was not happy about it, but we sat there on the couch, in near total silence, for 1 hour, and then another. His patience dwindled. "Listen," he said, "you know I work at 8 a.m. I can't stay up all night. I'm sorry, but I didn't hear anything." His voice was calm, but the effort involved in maintaining it that way was palpable. I left him, both of us frustrated, and returned to my bed. The knocks continued a short time later. He didn't mention them before he left in the morning. I was desperate. I felt hounded in my own home, like a rabbit cowering in its burrow as a wolf stalks outside. Except my wolf was inside my burrow. I could sense its presence in the air, dripping eager saliva, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I had to face it, to put a stop to it. I didn't know what else to do. The knocking, and the attendant anxiety, kept me up at night and ruined my days. I felt like a crazy person, fraught and irrational. I could stay in a hotel for a few nights or maybe couch surf for a while, but my savings would only last so long, and both of those solutions could only ever be temporary. I could move, sell my house, and go elsewhere, but what if the knocking followed me? I didn't think I could take that. The next night, I camped outside the basement door, clutching the kitchen knife, waiting for the knocking to start. I didn't have to wait long. The second that first knock shook the door, I lunged for the knob and wrenched it open. The solitary knock echoed in my mind, but behind the door was only silence and darkness. I gazed down the basement stairs. I knew I would have to descend. I moved gingerly, knife and phone light held out in front of me, down the steps and into the small cement room. "Who are you?" I yelled, swinging the knife and the light around wildly, desperately trying to pin down my harasser. "Leave me alone." The basement's gray walls seemed to drink in the sound of my shouting and gave nothing return. I stayed down there for what must have been an hour, heart pounding and blood rushing, slashing at shadows. Eventually, exhausted and as terrified as ever, I had to admit that there was nothing here. I'm losing my goddamn mind. I had taken one step up the stairs when my blood turned to ice. The basement door was closed. I was sure I had left it open when I came down, to mitigate the sense of claustrophobia. I ascended on tiptoe, forcing myself to take steady breaths. The knob didn't budge. The door wouldn't open. I couldn't understand why. There was no lock on this door, no latch, no other means of barring it shut. I thought, hoped even, for a moment, that perhaps something heavy had been placed in front of it. But I could see well enough through the door's undercut into the kitchen. I've tried to shoulder the door down. I've stabbed at it with the knife, tried to bash off the knob. Nothing has worked, not even a scratch on the whitewood. I've tried the police again. My call wouldn't go through. I've tried texting Connor, my boss, anyone who might be able to help me, but they've all gone undelivered. It's been hours. All I can do now is pound on the basement door, scream for help, and hope somebody comes to let me out. I've written this as a last-ditch effort. I'm going to try and post it anywhere I can. My internet is barely functioning, not well enough for the messaging apps. My phone is at 6%. I don't have any food or water. If you can read this, please, let me out.